Podcast has started.
Okay, yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, today, this week, we are on schedule. We're here, roughly at 10 a.m. on Monday, as we set out to do. Well, we're in February, so that means that we've been doing this, about 10 months or so? More or less?
More or less, yeah.
Wow. That's really neat. Matt, you constitute a chapter of my life, Matt. You constitute a chapter of my life. The work that we've been doing has been very exciting, and I see that the reading of this particular chapter, or the beginning of reading chapter 24, which is what we're going to discuss today, and of course we're only going to address section 1 of chapter 24 of this, what is this, the 6th or 7th part of this book. And I know there's one last part, and that last part is actually the part with which we began our work back in March or April of last year.
It's been that long?
Pardon?
Been that long?
It's been that long. Well, I mean, we were at the outset of doing some project or something like that when this damn quarantine hit, and we resolved to do this reading online and to discuss it under the framework of The Poet and the Professor. And so, it's been some time, and it's been a very informative and thought-provoking and exciting, believe it or not, exciting number of months for me as far as this reading goes. And as I've said numerous times, I've been very lucky and fortunate to be in conversation with you about this book. I find that reading something is always more meaningful when it's done, in the company, certainly when we're at the very least reading, or rather discussing the ideas that find themselves in a book. That for me is always, thought-provoking. Matt, how are you, and how are things?
I'm doing well. I'm just been, just really, just grinding, just trying to get to, getting things done as best I can, Yeah. It's been something. Without it's been something. But I'm I don't know. I feel like it is the life I have chosen, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of.
Did I catch a word in one of your posts recently that you've got? You're at the tail end, of course, of a book project, and did you say you have 2 others in store before the month of December finishes this year? Is that what I understand?
Not just 2. I got I'm at the tail end of a book project, but I also have another book of poetry planned. It's going to be very, very interesting. I feel I could talk more about that one than the other, because one of them is going to involve more like capital and stuff. Not capital. One is going to involve more people. 2 of them actually. The projects on the horizon involve more entities. This other one's just me and the company that publishes me. Like kind of like that I've got kind of the handshake gentleman's agreement with. So that would I could talk more about. So by the end of the year, I plan to finish something called Elon Musk Must Be Stopped. And what it is going to be a history of modern colonization. Culminates with the end with Elon Musk colonizing Mars. So it's going to begin with Columbus, and then it's going to end with colonize Mars.
Wow.
These are all poems, so it's gonna go like periodize it in the period of like the Spanish, invasion, and then into, the Dutch and the English and the French coming in a second wave, then going into the establishment of the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, and really kind of beginning formulations of capital that were also, imperial. And these are the first corporations, right? So these are the first corporations, and it's intricately tied to imperialism. So it's not like imperialism something happened later. The very formations of capital begin with imperialism. So it looks at that, and it's going to go, and it really, most things are written like about these subjects are capitalism. It's kind of like they major in capitalism, they minor in imperialism. Now they can really separate these things, but that's what they try to do, right? So like, here's the workers in like this place, and then here's also the fact that there's wars and imperialism. That's bad. This is actually going to do the reverse, right? It's going to be like, this is war, imperialism. That is the main story, is that these countries in Europe are invading and killing everyone. That is the main story. Incidentally, it's also bad for the workers in Europe. Incidentally, so it reverses what is significant and what is incidental.
Yeah,
reverses the relationship.
All right, perfect. You're drawing from a pattern of turning things upside down, as it were, that has been very important, certainly for my reading and understanding of history. Of course, where Marx turns the world upside down on its head, where Marx turns Hegel on his head. I see that you're doing something not unlike that, as far as our conventional understandings of the relationship between capital and empire, or might I say capital and race. Certainly, if we're talking about empire, we're centimeters and millimeters away, really, from a discussion of race. But anyway, let's talk about chapter 24. The conversion of surplus value into capital. And let's begin discussion of section 1 with its rather long title, Matt. Capitalist production on a progressively increasing scale, transition of the laws of property that characterize production of commodities into laws of capitalist appropriation. I'd like to say, in keeping with what I was talking about at the outset of our discussion this morning, that this reading has been as exciting as it has been informative. Where I have learned about surplus value, I've also added an understanding of Marx's perspectives about history and the economy to his own embattled and chaste life. That's with the letter D as in David, with his own chaste life. And I say chaste, of course, because, if it wasn't a government, if it wasn't some royalty, it was the police that was tracking him and chasing him from one place to another, as he was promoting an understanding and promoting material socialist relations in Europe in the 19th century. One thing that I learned of him as a father and as a reader, as I've read biographies of Marx before reading this particular book, Matt, is that he coupled these attributes such that he challenged his children to be well-read and sophisticated analysts of the world around them, and of course, by extension, the world economy. I have found myself learning the ins and outs of just this capacity, and I would like to share about this. In fact, I'd like to dedicate this observation to my thesis students, Ana Ramirez and Noel Lopez, who juggle apparently distinct and divided chapters in their investigations of Chicana and Chicano higher education, what some people call Latina and Latino higher education, what some people call Latinx higher education. In any case, I'd like to just juxtapose chapter 24 with chapter 4. Before I do that, of course, what I'd like to do is is share two quotes, Matt, and then ask for your opinion afterwards. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right? All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it goes like this. True, Marx writes, the matter assumes an entirely different aspect when we look upon capitalist production, about which we've read, of course, when we look upon capitalist production in the uninterrupted flow of its reproduction. And when we consider the capitalist class as a whole and its antagonist, the working class, instead of the individual capitalist and the individual laborer. But in so doing, we should be applying a standard which is totally foreign to the production of commodities. In the production of commodities, only sellers and buyers, independent of one another, meet. Their mutual relations cease with the termination of their mutual contract. If the transaction is repeated, it is done by a new contract which has nothing to do with the former one. And only an accident brings the same seller once more together with the same buyer. Later on, a couple paragraphs later, he writes, this result becomes inevitable as soon as labor power is sold as a commodity by the free laborer himself. It is from that time on that the production of commodities become universal and a typical form of production. Henceforth, every product is intended at the outset for sale, and all produced wealth passes through their circulation. The production of commodities does not impose itself upon the whole society until wage labor becomes its basis. This is simple enough, Matt, to understand, though tied to a preceding and, might I say, less abstract analysis of the encounter between the buyer and the seller of commodities. In the buyer's pursuit to extract more from the seller than what the seller surrenders in order to put whatever that commodity is, a jacket, a load of wool, or even the seller's labor, in the capitalist economy. And I'd like to close this particular portion of our discussion this morning, Matt, with the following quote. Marx wrote, in the simple circulation of the commodity transaction, the value of commodities attained at the most a form independent of their use values. But the same value now in circulation, commodity, money, or the circulation of capital, suddenly presents itself as an independent substance endowed with a motion of its own, passing through a life process of its own, in which money and commodities are mere forms which it assumes and casts off in turn. For only, and a few lines later, for only by the surplus value of 10 pounds, right, does the 100 originally advanced become capital. And this is the part that really begins to crystallize things for me, and I hope that they crystallize for folks that are following along. And certainly I hope that it crystallizes the relationship between one chapter, in this case chapter 4, with another chapter, in this case chapter 24, for my students who are writing their theses, at the tail end of their theses. And so soon as this takes place, so soon as the Son, and by the Son, the Father, is begotten, so soon does their difference vanish, and they again become one, 110 pounds. Matt, your thoughts about this kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, what I'm interested in mostly is when we talks about the idea that once wage labor becomes a dominant force in society, only that.
Okay, go ahead.
So like, what does that even mean, right? So if we think about, like a place like the United States, you think that, in the United States, most people in the 1800s, right, did not actually have an employer. They had their
Mm.
own
Mm.
farms. They had their own work. And so it's not until, what caught my attention to that is that the entire culture that comes out of it, right? The entire culture that we have today of get a job,
Yeah.
of learn a job, of to go play a part in society, and to whatever, these things that we naturalize are not actually um, there's nothing eternal about them. There's nothing fixed. There's nothing permanent about that way of thinking. That's the way we think, and that's what we're
Yeah.
taught to
Yeah.
put a kind of moral spin on, to put an ethical spin on, to place all this kind of like baggage on it. Like, if you don't do this, you're totally
Yeah.
fucked up. Um, it's actually, it comes from a time and place that these values come from, because in different times in history, you don't have to go get a job. You're born into a job. I mean, and maybe that's totally fucked up, and that's totally, like, wrong and bad as well. But the idea that you have to go pursue a job, prove your worth, make your way, do all these things like that we understand to be not just you know what we have to do to survive, but actually the way things should be. That this is a moral right, a moral imperative. This is like something that, if you were to watch a coming of age story, this is something your protagonist must learn, right? That they can't just go around, you know, just go around just being reckless and pursuing their fancies. They have to settle down. They have to figure something out. They have to, like, be responsible. They have to learn these skills to go get this job, right? But in the majority of, like, human history,
Yeah.
the majority of the time on the planet, the majority of the time after the agricultural revolution, right, in which we became kind of sedentary, that the idea that, like, you would have to go get a job. You were born into a
Yeah.
job. Your dad did this, and your
Yeah.
mom did that, and you were born into things, right? So it wasn't this question of this ragged pursuit of something. So um, the fact that we have this kind of culture in the United States and throughout much of the world, where it's kind of like
Yeah.
very much like I'm not wholly condemning it, or praising it,
Yeah.
or anything. I'm just simply saying that this comes from somewhere. This idea, like, choose your own adventure, choose your fate, choose your whatever. Now, okay, that's way more liberal. That's way more. That sounds more appealing. I mean, I'm born in this world, so obviously it sounds more appealing to me for some reason
Yeah.
than, like, serfdom, right? That sounds way more appealing to me. Your dad was a blacksmith, you're a
Yeah.
blacksmith. That's that, right? So the idea that I could choose not to do what my dad did or whatever is very appealing to me, right? Um, but the fact of the matter is that comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
This choose your own adventure, and also the precariousness, being born into the precariousness of that, like, you may fail and you may die, and that's just that, and it's your fault.
Yeah.
That comes from the capitalist system. That comes from this way of life. And that kind of, it's not an eternal principle, and it's not even, these aren't even principles that have existed before. You know what I'm saying? These are principles that are ushered in by an economic system, as are all principles they're kind of like that tend to permeate society. The principle emerges from the economy in play. So these things you think about life are really the thoughts you have, given the time and place you were born into, and the economic constraints
Yeah.
you found yourself in.
You know, as I sometimes say, this hurried and harried, this hurried and harried life of ours um, uh, is very visible to me when I find myself, and I haven't. This hasn't been the case for some time. When I have found myself at the window of an airplane in descent. So as I'm looking out the window, and as I'm looking at life below me, I think about the the similarity between traffic and the grind of insects, of ants, even on the that I see on a day-to-day basis. And this existence this existence is certainly a product of, our existence is certainly a product of the kind of things that were taking place and really began to crystallize in the middle of the 19th century. Certainly it was, taking place beforehand, but, went into a higher gear, another gear in the middle of the 19th century, such that we live our life the way that we live our lives, much as we do today. And to follow up on your thought and your contemplation, Matt, it makes me think about, and this is stuff that we read in the final chapters in the final part of Marx's work at the beginning of our reading last year, that life in pre-capitalist society was really determined by the routines of nature and man's ascription, and humanity's, I should say, humanity's